So I want to talk today just briefly about some fairly boring looking numbers, but what's actually going on is so important and so significant. So right now the inflation rate in the UK is around 9%, and the Bank of England thinks it will go up to about 11% by the end of the year, which is the highest rate it's been at for like 40 years. Between February and April, real wages fell by an average of 3%. And you know, those might not necessarily seem like numbers that relate to what's happening to you or to people around you. But to put that into sort of super stark contrast, that means that in April, regular wages adjusted for inflation, like the actual power, the spending power of what the average person in Britain is taking home, fell by 4.5% just in April. That means that the amount you have to spend per week for an average person in Britain has fallen by £26. That's the spending power that you have has gone down by £26 a week. And I mean, that is a lot of money, especially when you consider that, you know, a lot of what you spend money on is already sort of eaten up with, you know, things that don't change in value, like, you know, your rent or whatever. That's just like a set number. And, you know, you have to eat and you have to pay your gas and your electric. And anyway, they're going up. But yeah, you're literally £26 a week out of pocket thanks to what's going on. And it seems like the government isn't really bothering to do anything about it. I think they've let these numbers creep worse and worse, and they've let inequality get worse and worse in the UK for a really long time. And because it's been kind of subtle, no one's done anything about it. And now, thanks to COVID, they're like, oh, looks like we can actually make people's lives worse in a blinding hurry. And they still do remarkably little about it. There are some really practical things that we can and should be doing. First of all, we need to look at how we can increase wages. And there are a few suggestions out there. For example, trade unions are suggesting £15 an hour as a minimum for carers, which seems like eminently reasonable, because I don't think that those who work in caring professions should be queuing outside food banks. I don't think that's a society that we want to live in. Of course, raising the minimum wage would be a really great idea. And there are also loads of measures that we can be taking. They've said they're going to delay tax cuts because otherwise it'll only cause more inflation. But ultimately, this idea that we have to control inflation, like the reason prices are going up is because we're allowing companies to be greedier and greedier and greedier. And you can tell that because buried in the numbers, what is Rishi Sunak saying? He's saying that there is a 0.3% rise in the number of workers on payroll. So there's a tiny incremental rise in the number of people who are officially listed as having a job, although it says nothing about whether those jobs pay even enough to live. And he points out that redundancies are really low. Well, I mean, obviously that sounds great. No one wants to get made redundant, but you know that people get made redundant when the work that they do no longer generates a profit for the company that they work for. So if people aren't getting made redundant, that suggests that companies are making a great profit for each employee that they have, and they've no need to fire anybody because every individual in their company is churning in the cash for them. And that suggests that the solution to this is right in front of our eyes, that we need to make sure that people are being paid a decent wage. And the big step that we should be doing to bring this in is the employment bill, which the government promised when it first got into power, and we've been talking about for a really long time, and it needs to come to the front of the list right now. It would do a number of things. First of all, we should be using it to ban 0 hours contracts, saying that people have to be contracted to a minimum number of hours each week so that if they're going to be employed and retained by companies. Secondly, we should be banning the practice of fire and rehire, which has been used so widespread across all kinds of industries and the public sector in the last few years, where people are basically being fired from their jobs and then rehired on worse conditions because they're not allowed to be their conditions are not allowed to deteriorate. So they're like, oh, here's what we'll do, we'll fire you. And then you have to like come back and take your job again, but on way worse wages. And lots of other things that we could include in an employment bill, including stuff around health and safety, including stuff about childcare, including stuff about flexible working, including stuff that would be really, really useful for loads of people around the UK. And it's easy to feel like, oh, you know, I went to the shops and certain things seem to have gotten much more expensive, like basic necessities, food, energy. Oh, this is so expensive these days. And to kind of, oh, aren't things getting expensive? But what's happening is not that, oh, a few things are getting expensive. Everything is getting more expensive, and there are real reasons behind it that the government can and should be challenging. And it's about time that they did that. And in the meantime, I urge you to not think of these as trivial numbers that, oh, well, it's just a few percent. It's going to add up to a huge, huge amount very quickly. So let's get on it and start making a fuss about it and making sure that some real change happens. See you next week.